$9.69. That's what a Chevron station in Fenner, California was charging for a single gallon of regular gasoline in March 2026. Not premium, not diesel, just regular. The kind of gas you'd fill up your daily driver with. $9.69 per gallon. You might be thinking, okay, that's one remote highway stop. But here's the thing. A Chevron in Los Angeles' own Chinatown neighborhood, smack in the middle of the second largest city in the United States, was charging $8.71 a gallon that same week. Another station in Vidal Junction was posting $7.79. These weren't outliers in the middle of nowhere. These were ordinary gas stations in ordinary neighborhoods, and the prices looked like something out of a nightmare. California's statewide average for regular gasoline crossed $5.88 per gallon in the first week of April 2026. By April 7th, AAA had it at $5.93s. And the experts who study this market for a living, not internet commenters but University of California researchers and state energy analysts, are now openly saying this might not even be the worst of it. So how did we get here? The story isn't about inflation or oil markets in the way you've heard before. It's about two massive factories that quietly shut down, a special type of gasoline only California requires, a watchdog agency that was built to protect consumers but may have waited too long to act, and a supply problem that simply cannot be fixed quickly. Let's go through all of it. To understand just how extreme California's situation is, you need the national picture first. On April 3, 2026, the national average for regular gasoline crossed $4 per gallon for the first time in more than 3 years. That alone was a major headline. $4 nationally is a psychological threshold, the number that changes how Americans think about their budgets and commutes. By April 9th, the national average had climbed to $4.17. Those are genuinely high prices. Now hold that $4.17 next to California's $5.93s. The gap between them is $1.76 per gallon. Let's make that real. A driver in Dallas, Texas filled up on April 1st at $3.27 per gallon. A driver in Los Angeles paid $5.89 on the same day. That's a $2.62 difference per gallon. On a 15-gallon tank, the California driver paid $39.30 more, every single fill-up. What makes this even more striking is how fast the gap grew. 6 weeks earlier, California was only about 75 cents above the national average. Already high, but in a familiar range. In under 2 months, that gap more than doubled. California didn't just rise with the national market, it launched out ahead of it at a completely different speed. Hawaii came in as the second most expensive state at $5.50, still 40 cents below California. Washington state was at $5.37. Every other state in the country was below $5. California wasn't just leading the chart, it was in its own separate category. And to understand why, you have to follow the story back to two specific buildings. Walk through the actual week-by-week timeline of what happened at California pumps in 2026, because watching it unfold in sequence makes the severity impossible to ignore. March 2nd, California's average was $4.59 per gallon. Expensive, but stable. People grumbled, but adjusted. It wasn't breaking news territory. Then something flipped. By March 9th, just 7 days later, the statewide average jumped to $5.20. That single-week move of 61 cents was one of the fastest weekly surges California had seen in years. Overnight, the state crossed the $5 threshold that analysts had been warning about for months. Even the pessimists didn't see a 61-cent week coming that early in spring. March 16th, $5.50. March 23rd, $5.76. March 30th, $5.83. April the 1st, $5.89. April 7th, $5.93, and climbing. In 36 days, California gas rose by $1.34 per gallon, the fastest 6-week price surge the state had seen since the wild spikes of 2022. Part of this had a seasonal explanation that doesn't get much press: the annual switch to summer blend gasoline. Every year in late February and early March, California stations are required to begin selling a cleaner burning formula mandated by state air quality rules. This transition always creates a temporary supply crunch. Refineries flush out winter blend and produce the new formula before it can go on sale. In a normal year, that process adds 20 to 30 cents per gallon and fades in a few weeks. But 2026 was not a normal year. The summer blend switch happened right on top of a structural supply crisis that had been building for months. Instead of a seasonal 25-cent bump that corrects itself, it became the spark that lit an already unstable market. And to understand why the market was unstable to begin with, you have to look at two refineries that most Californians had never heard of until they were gone. The single biggest driver of California's 2026 fuel crisis isn't geopolitics, isn't OPEC, and isn't inflation. It's two massive industrial plants that made gasoline for millions of Californians and then stopped. Phillips 66. In October 2024, the company announced it would permanently shut down its Los Angeles area refinery in Wilmington, California. The facility had been processing 139,000 barrels of crude oil every single day, roughly 5.8 million gallons of gasoline and diesel combined, produced daily, pumped directly into California's supply chain. The wind down began in September 2025. By early 2026, the facility had stopped producing fuel. The equipment was being decommissioned, and 277 workers received layoff notices, with 122 of those cuts arriving in April 2026 as the final shutdown phase completed. Hold that number, 139,000 barrels per day, gone. The second refinery, Valero's Benicia facility just north of San Francisco. Capacity 145,000 barrels per day, even larger than Phillips 66. Valero announced the closure in April 2025 with a target shutdown date of end of April 2026. Then things moved faster than anyone expected. A former plant manager confirmed to reporters that Valero began shutting down operations in February 2026, 4 months ahead of the official deadline. The reasoning was straightforward. Every additional month of running a plant with no long-term future wasn't worth the cost. So Valero accelerated. To walk away from Benicia, Valero absorbed a $1 billion loss. $1 billion in write-downs just to exit California. That number tells you something powerful. When a company is willing to take a $1 billion hit rather than continue operating, it speaks to just how unfavorable the economics of California's refining market had become. Together, the two closures removed 284,000 barrels per day of capacity, roughly 17 to 20% of California's entire refining base. The largest single-year capacity reduction the state has ever experienced, but the number alone doesn't capture the full problem. The real trap is about what makes California's fuel supply fundamentally different from any other state in America. California requires a special formulation of gasoline called CARB fuel, California Air Resources Board-approved blend. It burns cleaner and produces fewer smog-forming chemicals, which matters in a state with 39 million people and serious air quality challenges. The problem, CARB fuel is chemically different from the gasoline sold in every other state in the country. When California loses refining capacity, it cannot draw replacement fuel from Texas pipelines or Gulf Coast refineries. That fuel doesn't meet California's standards. The state can only replace lost supply with CARB-compliant fuel, and the number of facilities worldwide that produce California spec blend is small and getting smaller. A Stanford University report submitted to the California State Senate put it plainly: California is a sealed fuel system. When the seal gets smaller, there's no quick fix. In 2023, California created the Division of Petroleum Market Oversight, the DPMO. It was described as the first state-level independent petroleum watchdog agency in American history, equipped with subpoena power over California's 5 major refiners. Its entire purpose was to monitor prices, catch suspicious pricing behavior, and hold oil companies accountable when prices couldn't be explained by market fundamentals. The DPMO spent its first 2 years publishing reports. One of those reports from 2024 contained a striking finding. After accounting for California's environmental rules, its taxes, and every legitimate cost factor, Californians were still paying 41 cents per gallon more than they should be, and that 41 cents was flowing directly into industry profit margins, not to necessary maintenance, not to infrastructure upgrades, just profits. Despite that finding, the DPMO had no open enforcement actions, no subpoenas issued, no formal investigations. The watchdog had teeth, it just hadn't used them. Then March 2026 arrived. As prices crossed $5, then $5.50, then hit $6, $7, and $8 at individual stations, pressure on the DPMO became impossible to ignore. On March 19th, the division issued its first ever enforcement bulletin alongside a consumer advisory. Director Ty Milder used language that was unusually blunt for a government agency. He described the price spikes at certain stations as disproportionate, meaning the prices had risen far beyond what increases in crude oil or wholesale gasoline prices could justify. The official statement: these unusually high prices are not justified by current crude oil prices or gasoline futures. 3 days later, California launched a full-price gouging probe. By March 31st, the California Energy Commission formally expanded the investigation. The DPMO confirmed it was examining specific stations in Los Angeles County and San Bernardino County, stations where pricing appeared, in the agency's own words, excessive and disproportionate to their input costs. The investigation is ongoing as of April 2026. A decision on whether to impose California's new refined profit margin penalty could come by the end of June. It would be the first time the penalty mechanism from the 2023 law has ever been triggered. But here's the uncomfortable reality. You can subpoena a gas station. You cannot subpoena your way into having more refineries. The investigation may catch individual bad actors. It cannot fix the structural supply problem underneath. California's gas prices aren't just high because of market events. They're high because of a set of structural conditions that stack on top of each other and create an environment where price shocks hit harder, last longer, and are harder to reverse than anywhere else. Start with the taxes. California's total state gas tax as of January 1st, 2026 is 70.9 cents per gallon. The national average state gas tax is 33.5 cents. California charges more than double. Oklahoma charges 19 cents. Texas charges 20 cents. Before any other factor comes into play, California drivers are already paying 50 cents more per gallon in state taxes than most Americans. And that figure will go up again on July 1st, 2026, when the next annual inflation-linked adjustment applies. Add the CARB blend isolation. Add the fact that California produces less than 24% of the crude oil it consumes daily. The state burns through more than 13.1 million gallons of gasoline per day and can only source a fraction of it locally. Add 2 decades of refinery closures, the BP Carson refinery in 2012, the ExxonMobil Torrance facility's decline after a 2015 explosion, the Marathon Martinez conversion in 2020, the Phillips 66 Rodeo conversion in early 2025, and now Wilmington and Benicia both dark in 2026. Each closure was framed as an isolated business decision at the time. Viewed together, they tell the story of a state that watched its refining backbone slowly disappear. The California Energy Commission had been aware of this trajectory for years. In a 2024 transportation fuels assessment, the CEC listed possible responses to the coming closures, including, in a line that surprised many readers, the possibility of California purchasing and operating its own refineries directly. State-owned refineries. That option wasn't pursued. A state-managed emergency fuel reserve, similar to the Federal Strategic Petroleum Reserve, was also listed as an option. That wasn't implemented either. As of April 2026, California has no emergency fuel stockpile, no state-owned supply buffer, and 12 refineries trying to serve a market that used to depend on 14. And every driver at every pump is living with the consequences of that math. The researchers who model California's fuel supply are not projecting that prices will fall back anytime soon. The consensus view is that the worst is still ahead. The UC Davis study is the most specific. University of California economists modeled the exact price impact of both refinery closures and found that when the first closure hit, California would see a roughly 40-cent immediate price increase, which proved accurate. For the second phase, once both closures are fully absorbed and the market reaches its new equilibrium by August 2026, their model projects prices 1.21 per gallon above pre-closure levels as the sustained new baseline. Not a spike, a floor. USC economist Michael Mish's analysis goes further. His report, published in May 2025 and cited by CBS News Sacramento and energy industry outlets, projects that the combined effect of the two closures could push California's average to between $7.35 and $8.43 per gallon by the end of 2026. When the report came out, prices were around $4.80 and the $8 projection seemed extreme. In April 2026, with prices at $5.93 and trending up, it looks considerably less theoretical. Diesel tells a separate story that almost nobody is discussing. California diesel on April 1, 2026 is $7.52 per gallon, a 49.7% increase year over year, nearly 50% in 12 months. Diesel is how the American economy moves: produce, packages, construction materials, appliances. When diesel jumps 50% in California in a single year, that cost gets passed on through every supply chain, every delivery, every item on every shelf. The economic ripple from that number is still moving through the system. 2 more pressure points are still ahead. The July 1st, 2026 gas tax hike will add cents per gallon on schedule, and California is finalizing updates to its low-carbon fuel standard, an update that energy analysts say could add anywhere from 5 to 65 cents per gallon to fuel costs as carbon credit prices fluctuate. Neither of these has hit yet, and the 12 remaining California refineries are operating with more pressure than ever. One unexpected outage at any single plant would constrict an already stressed supply system with no backup and no reserve to absorb the shock. The structural problems in this story aren't something any individual driver can solve, but there are real, practical ways to reduce how hard the crisis hits your wallet right now. The most actionable tip comes directly from the state's own watchdog. Buried in the DPMO's consumer advisory was a line that most people skipped over. All gasoline sold in California, branded or unbranded, must meet the same strict CARB standards. The Shell logo on a pump and the no-name sign on the corner station down the street are selling chemically identical fuel. And yet branded stations routinely charge 30 to 50 cents per gallon more. That's not a quality premium. That's a brand recognition premium. At $5.93 per gallon in a crisis, 40 cents per gallon saved adds up fast. Apps are worth using. GasBuddy pulls real-time prices reported by other drivers and updates continuously. Filter to a 1-mile radius rather than 5. Prices can vary by 50 cents within a few city blocks during a price spike. Waze also surfaces fuel prices on screen while navigating, making it easy to spot cheaper stations along your route without going out of your way. Warehouse Club memberships, Costco Sam's Club, have historically priced fuel 20 to 40 cents below the local market average. The line at Costco pumps across Southern California is currently running 20 to 30 minutes during peak hours, which is a signal that people have done the math and decided the savings are worth the wait. Credit cards offering 3 to 5% cash back on gas purchases are worth using as well. On a $90 California fill-up, 5% back means $4.50 returned to you on every tank. Timing matters too. Fuel pricing data consistently shows that Tuesday and Wednesday mornings, around 10 a.m., are the cheapest points of the week to fill up before weekend demand and station margin behavior push prices back up. Over a full year of fill-ups, buying on Tuesday instead of Friday makes a measurable difference. None of this changes the bigger picture. The refineries are not coming back. The CARB seal on California's fuel market isn't opening. The tax increases are coming on schedule. And the experts projecting $7 or $8 by end of year aren't doing so from a position of pessimism. They're doing it from supply chain models that have so far proven more accurate than optimistic forecasts. California entered this situation over decades of incremental decisions. The exit, if there is one, will take just as long. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. What happens to its fuel prices doesn't stay in California. It flows through trucking costs, food prices, housing costs, and the financial lives of 40 million people. The 588 headline grabbed attention, but the story underneath, the sealed market, the lost refineries, the watchdog finally acting, the projections pointing higher, is the one that will define California's economic landscape for years. The drivers lined up at $5.93 pumps right now are paying the price for decisions made long before they pulled up to the nozzle.